Hello and welcome back to Learn It from a Layman. I am Carl Christensen, joined by world-renowned and leading geneticist Tim Cox.
Hello, it's
Uh,
me, the world-renowned leading geneticist.
yeah, um, you don't. Ironically, we've actually had someone on the podcast that has worked with the CRISPR technology, which is gene editing, um, and she spoke to you know uh, the CRISPR technology and how you use it in genetics and things like that. And now today we're talking about the basics of cloning, and we got Tim to talk about it.
And just to be clear, I'm pretty good at CRISPR too. I've been making things CRISPR for a long time. Toast, cheese crisps, some taco shells. Anyways, so I feel like I've got something to say about this.
It's painful.
That's my goal.
And you succeeded. Okay, so we are going to be talking about cloning today, obviously in light of the dire wolf, um, rebirth. We're going to discuss what cloning is, what it looks like, and some of the next steps in cloning, or at least I think that's what Tim's going to talk about. But it is Tim, so I guess we'll find out.
That's
Tim.
right. You never know. Okay. So first, I'll just kind of survey what you've probably already seen in the news, but just in case you haven't, there's been a lot of chatter about the de-extinction of the dire wolf and this company, Colossal Biosciences or something, and talk about de-extincting the dire wolf. And just to make sure we're clear on what the dire wolf is, so the dire wolf was a North American member of the canid, dog family. Um, that it was part of the kind of Ice Age era super megafauna in North America. So it was like modern wolves but bigger. It's been popularized with some fantasy um, installments like Game of Thrones, where they have dire wolves, which are not actually based on the real actual historical dire wolf, except maybe loosely. But yeah, so dire wolf, you can think it was a large wolf-like creature. It's actually not. Wolves are not descended from dire wolves. Wolves and dire wolves are descended from a common ancestor that way back there. And then dire wolves went extinct sometime after between now and the Ice Age, like more than 10,000 years ago. And so now there are no dire wolves in North America, just like there are no woolly rhinoceroses or saber-toothed tigers and all of that stuff.
So it sounds like it was a dire situation.
Indeed.
uh,
Carl, have you thought about a laugh track for the? Yes.
yeah, I mean, it's what we require in order to really give this podcast the right feel.
That's right. As I recall, at one point we did like a little stand-up comedy routine and with a laugh track. Right? Am I remembering that right?
That's correct. That's correct. I don't think the audience necessarily wants to relive our glory days, but yes, former stand-up comedians with our own laugh track.
Calling us former stand-up comedians is probably like calling every boy in the world a former firefighter. You know, yeah, we put on boots and a helmet and ran around and pretended to put out fires. It's
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we had a gig, Tim, but you just bailed on it. Okay, we're going to get back to the dire wolves.
That's right, dire wolves, dire wolves. Okay, so all right, so fast forward, so what happened is this company, Colossal Sciences, has created it. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and get right into the spiel. And I owe a lot here to Hank Green, a popular science podcaster. You might see him on the SciShow YouTube channel. Great stuff. I like hearing from him. So he put out a little blurb on the dire wolf. So I've read a couple of articles and listened to Hank Green talk about the dire wolves, and so now I'm distilling that. From Hank Green, my fellow science expert. I'm sure he
also
would.
leading geneticist.
Yeah, also, yeah. Hank Green actually has some some knowledge to make such claims. I guess he's not a geneticist, but he is a science dude. But anyways, so I'm passing that along. So just want to, if you're interested in this topic, then that's a good place to start, in my opinion, to dig in and get more information. But here's the long and short of it. So to be totally clear, these wolves that have been created are not technically real dire wolves. What the Colossal Biosciences did was they took gray wolf genetic material, and they analyzed the dire wolf genome, the genes of the dire wolf, which they were able to extract from some tissue samples that were discovered from thousands upon thousands of years ago. And so basically what they did is they did a lot of cool fancy science and computer work to kind of figure out how to modify the gray wolf genome to give a gray wolf dire wolf traits. And so they made, I'm trying to remember how many swaps or changes to the genome. It was somewhere on the order of 20 or a couple dozen, something like that. And so and they made changes to affect color, because they kind of analyzed things to look at, okay, what color would dire wolves have been, to affect size. Dire wolves were bigger. And so they've made these changes. And so if this is sounding familiar, you might be thinking back to Jurassic Park, where they took amphibian genes and spliced in genes extracted from amber trapped. But anyways, blah blah blah. So this is kind of like it's not as fancy as Jurassic Park, right? But it's in general the same concept. You are using genetics to recreate traits that are absent or have gone extinct. Now, so the point of order, and there's been a lot of criticism from scientists and people, because part of the criticism is that they're saying, hang on, you haven't actually de-extincted dire wolves. These are gray wolves that have had their genes patched a little bit to make them look like dire wolves. But that doesn't sound as cool to say. And so this is a really interesting case study on the intersection of business and science, right? For Colossal, this company, it makes a whole lot of sense to say, boom, we've de-extincted the dire wolf. And that's how you can, as Hank Green put it, excite billionaires, get funding, and get a lot of attention. If you say, oh, well, we've taken the gray wolf, which we've determined is the closest living animal to the dire wolf, which is actually not technically or necessarily true, because jackals or coyotes or other modern living canids would be, could be just as closely related, because they all share a common ancestor. Anyways, but it just isn't as splashy to say, hey, we've modified gray wolves to look and act like dire wolves, or at least what we perceive or believe, according to our research, a dire wolf would look and act like. So the big takeaway is this true de-extinction? No, not unless you want to be really flexible with what you think de-extinction means. Is this cool? That is, I think there's more room to talk about that, because this is cool. It's some incredible science they're doing, and really impressive things that they're managing to do to make all this happen and actually create a creature that looks and acts like a dire wolf. So the question then is there still value to this? And I think there is some value in a couple of ways. And again, I'm parroting things that other people have said, so you can look around but anyways, a couple of ways that they have value. One, this as a proof of concept. While this isn't a real de-extinction of the dire wolf, this is pretty cool. And it's kind of showing that there's a lot of potential with this gene editing technology that scientists can do pretty cool things, and maybe with more progress made, more things could be done. And the other thing is, while this isn't the recreation of a dire wolf, if you do have a creature that goes extinct, if you, I'm going to go ahead and borrow from Hank Green. He made a metaphor about an ecosystem being like a Jenga, a stack of Jenga blocks. And if you have a keystone animal or part of that ecosystem that gets taken away, it can make that ecosystem a lot more wobbly and maybe even collapse. Now, you can't get that block back, at least not with the technology we currently have. But what if you could create a piece that more or less fits in that same spot? If there were still dire wolf habitat in the world, even though these animals that have been created are not true dire wolves, if they could be created to look and act like dire wolves, they could be reinserted in that Jenga stack and kind of fill that niche and keep the ecosystem going. And there's a lot of complexity, it goes into that it's not just an easy answer to that question. But with progress and with what we do, maybe that kind of thing could be done. Colossal has goals to bring back other animals like the dodo. And although where they're at currently, they wouldn't be able to actually recreate a dodo, if they could modify the genome of a closely related bird to look and act like a dodo and then reintroduce it on, I can't remember which island the dodo was on, but reintroduce it there, and maybe it could fill that role. And even though it's not technically a dodo, if it's filling that spot, it could help that ecosystem, right? And again, there's a lot of debate about whether that's ethical or feasible and problems that might ensue. But in theory, that would be cool, right? Sorry, go for it.
Well, you've already referenced Jurassic Park, so whether that would be cool is a question for a different blockbuster where somebody gets eaten. I introduced this podcast as a cloning podcast, and so far, you're talking about de-extinction, which cloning and de-extinction are like related concepts, but they're not the same. Like cloning is like one way to de-instinctify.
Yeah, I think that's the official scientific term. Yeah, that de-extinctive.
Right, and you explained that what Colossal did is not. It's just gene editing, right? It's not actually. They didn't really actually bring back the dire wolf per se. And it's certainly not cloning, because that's a different process.
Well, and I'm probably already out of my depth here, but so cloning, it depends on what you mean by that. So if we mean clone in the sense of like Star Wars, you created 100,000 genetically identical copies.
Is there another sense?
That's right. But
everything is relating to Star Wars.
As it should. After all, tomorrow is Star Wars Day. So
yeah, may the 4th be with you.
That's right. Here, come in, Grace. So cloning, like if you recall, the first instance of cloning was Dolly the sheep, right? In the 90s,
right.
And so there's this cloning technology where you're able to take genetic material, eggs and so forth, and you are able to put them in and put it in a surrogate mother and all of that stuff, and you're able to make modifications to the genome and that kind of thing. So this is cloning technology. And I suppose I don't know if they could make clones of Romulus, Remus, and I can't remember the other one. It's some Game of Thrones allusion. But anyways, they made these direwolves. So it's using cloning technology. I guess we could split hairs on they're not technically clones or not, but I think that's not the most interesting question in my mind. They're building on all of that cloning stuff, though.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, any of that genetic modification is, yeah. I mean, it's, I guess, in the layman's bucket, it can all be tossed in together. And but on a separate note, you talked about the idea of de-instinctifying, whatever, bringing the dodo back. And what I actually have this question about the direwolves too. So maybe you already know you've already looked this stuff up. Okay, I have only cursorily read these articles, and I've seen pictures of 2 direwolves. I'd imagine in order to actually bring back a species, there needs to be some type of critical mass of like, of that species to begin. Like, you can't just have 2 direwolves and expect a whole, population of direwolves to be created from those 2 direwolves, right?
Sure, and they Colossal Biosciences actually addressed that. So with their current methodology, what they're doing is since they're using gray wolf genome, there's plenty of biodiversity of gray wolves. So you can take, 100, 200, however many gray wolf, eggs or whatever, and make those same 25, give or take, gene changes in all of them to dire wolfify them, and you've got 200 wolves worth of genetic diversity there. So with their methodology, that's probably how they would resolve that problem, I imagine, if they were trying to establish a breeding population. With the direwolves, I don't believe that that's their intent. As critics have pointed out, de-extinctionating, dang it, dire wolves is just kind of a scientific exercise. There's no dire wolf habitat remaining, right? The Ice Age world that the dire wolves lived in, the large majority of the prey animals that they would have hunted are no longer on this earth, right? So as far as reintroducing that whole fitting a puzzle piece that belongs back in argument, again, that's where I think the dire wolf story here is more a proof of concept. Less trumpeted, but still significant. They've been doing, I think, some cloning with red wolves, which I think is probably more practical as far as you've got a critically low population and at risk of extinction, and if they can use this technology to maybe shore up or introduce genetic diversity, I don't know. There is a case to be made for, obviously there is still red wolf habitat in the world, and that's part of Colossal's argument, because there are also people who are saying, hey, hang on here, you're drawing attention away from the real problem, which is human activity is causing extinctions, right? And so rather there are conservation efforts going around, and if you're drawing funding and attention away from conservation efforts, then we can't de-extinctify species at the rate that we're driving them to extinction, and we need to turn more towards stopping the problem than trying to fix the problem after it's already happened, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Colossal's argument is it doesn't have to be both, and that they can use this science to help with those and bring more attention to it. And I think there's arguments to be made on either side, and it probably depends on the situation which argument is right. But yeah,
because I've
an interesting discussion.
Yeah, I've also heard. So I know that years ago there was discussion, and I think it's still. I just looked it up actually, so I know it's still going on. Discussion, I think by Colossal, they're trying to de-instinctify, de-extinct, whatever. I should just give up on the word. The woolly mammoth, and part of the reason, from what I've read before, about why we want the woolly mammoth back, and like you said, in a particular habitat, is that since the extinction of the woolly mammoth and or whatever animal, like it changes the ecosystem. And for woolly mammoths, my understanding is that the tundra, like the waste tundra, like in parts of Siberia, I don't know the locale. Let's not pretend like I do. But wherever it was, there's some kind of grassland or something where like the woolly mammoths used to keep it in check by grazing or whatever. I feel like I'm just spreading misinformation. There was some
Snuffleupagus. Put in a snuffleupagus.
There was some need for woolly mammoths in order to help an ecosystem, and that if woolly mammoths were brought back from extinction, it would actually potentially even help some climate issues. And so that would be an argument to say, like, okay, instead of just focusing on conservation efforts, like if we're also interested in the health of the planet, some of these animals should be brought back. But yeah, all of this gets very complicated when you start thinking about how there are always like there are known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns, and the unknown unknowns are the things that should keep you up at night. And so the unknown unknowns about bringing back an animal seem to be known, if you will.
Yeah, boy.
Anyway,
I know. I don't know.
Okay. No, you shouldn't. Okay, let's talk a little bit more then about. So you said Colossal's next steps are the dodo. Is that are they talking about only the dodo next? Or
I think there was like the dodo. I think you're right. The woolly mammoth is one that they're looking at, and I can't remember if there are any others. I know I'm not sure if it's the same company, but there's been talk about bringing back the thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And so yeah, I don't know offhand which ones, but yeah, and you're right. Those question marks, and again, I think it's need to the critics have a point that if we were to reintroduce woolly mammoths, the first point would be like, that's not a real woolly mammoth. That's an African elephant,
a hairy elephant, yeah,
hair and a few other features. And but that said, and as you noted, these ecosystems change. When the woolly mammoth went extinct, the ecosystem changed, and what we view as normal, as the normal Arctic tundra or whatever, may not always have been, of course, the normal. So yeah, I mean, and what do we do with that? I think creating these creatures, Colossal is within their rights to do that. But if they get to a point where they've got a population, they say, okay, we're ready to release these in North Canada and Russia. All of a sudden now this is in the public sphere. Is it really, is that the right thing to do? And yeah, all the conservationists just smacking their head against the wall and saying, you know what, we've got all these other creatures that are at risk of extinction. Anyways, it's certainly interesting. I do give credit to Colossal for kind of pushing the boundaries of the unknown and trying things out. That's not to so far as to give it a stamp of approval, but I'm kind of in a, well, let's see what happens next, and so I'm withholding judgment in the meantime.
Yeah, to take a quick sidestep, I actually want to ask you, and I don't know if you read up on this, but I've been looking a little bit into like human cloning, because it seems like potentially if people clicked on this episode thinking, obviously I think people would know that we're talking about dire wolves, but if we're talking about cloning, and what about human cloning? But before we talk about that, I want to put forward a situation for you, Tim, which it might be hypothetical, but I think could be realistic, where I think that people, because of the Jurassic Park like fantasy, know that like bringing dinosaurs back, despite like take all of the probably numerous obstacles in the way of getting an actual dinosaur, birds, and like living. Let's say all of those are removed. I think there would still be enough people that watched Jurassic Park as a kid that would be like, you know what, let's probably not do that. But what about like the dire wolf and the dodo bird and woolly mammoths and other things like this, where creatures where we feel like I said, even if it's just genetic modifications of existing animals, these are like the dire wolf got just grabbed headlines. He said, got interest from billionaires with deep pockets. I don't think there are any billionaires without deep pockets, I guess. But but like the idea of creating a zoo for genetically modified animals, where you can be like, this is the dire wolf exhibit, and this is the woolly mammoth exhibit, and this is the whatever the Australian, whatever it was, I don't know what
Tasmanian tiger.
The Tasmanian tiger exhibit, and all of these extinct animals that you have on display in a zoo seems like it would be massive, right? It seems like it would be a something bigger than Disneyland, right? So and in as much as you said, all you're taking is taking an existing gray wolf and modifying it. You're taking an existing elephant and modifying it. And in as much as you're not trying to induce them back into the population, you don't have to deal with a lot of the other potential other ecosystem and moral questions, I guess. Is there any reason that wouldn't work, and or what's stopping people from doing that?
Okay, yeah, I mean, in theory, it could. I mean, the biggest thing that's stopping them is this is really hard to do, right? It took a lot of work to do kind of in terms of what you're talking about, to do a relatively small thing. The wolves that have been created, these so-called dire wolves, are really just gray wolves with a few modifications. It would be a much bigger leap to try to turn that wolf into, say, a wiener dog, or something else. Going from there, I mean, if let's say wiener dogs had gone extinct, and you wanted to,
then nobody would want to bring them back.
Yeah, that's right. What am I thinking? That's everyone say that's a good first step.
Yeah, that's one we can really get behind, Tim.
Yeah, that's right. But since wiener dogs and gray wolves actually share a good deal of genetic, and I suppose probably the it would be the other direction. Let's say gray wolves went extinct and we only had wiener dogs to bring them back with, right? It would be a pretty drastic leap, even though they share quite a bit of genetic material to make that happen. And I would bet a good deal beyond the Colossal Biosciences abilities at this point. So, taking a creature like the Tasmanian tiger or the dodo bird, where there's no like living near surrogate, like there's not a creature similar to the Tasmanian tiger or similar to the dodo bird that's a relatively close jump. So there would be a whole lot more of lifting and a whole lot more chances for things to go south, because when you make these and again, I'm drawing on a point that Hank Green made, is said, real genetic variation happens over thousands and thousands of years. So if for example, a canid were to evolve to get bigger, the genes that make that happen would also, there's other things that can happen in complex interplays we really don't understand very well. And but that gets refined and happens gradually over the course of tens of thousands of years, right? If we just go from point A to point B and say, bloop, now we're going to put in a gene that makes them bigger. There's a lot of interplays that could also be affected by that. And we don't know. We don't know what it'll do, but just a lot more chances for things to fail and not work, or problems to occur. Maybe we, increase the chances that it gets cancer or something. So, anyways, it's taking a gray wolf and making it dire wolfy is a relatively small step. Taking a pigeon and trying to make it into a dodo, much bigger step. So that's the real biggest problem, or biggest barrier, is we're still in the infancy of this stuff, and we'll see how far we can take it. I don't doubt, seeing the way that technology advances, that years from now, maybe as you and I get a little older, we'll see more impressive feats of genetic modification. I'm sure when Orville and Wilbur Wright were making the airplane, not many people were thinking about when will we have a machine that can fly us to the moon. But within a few short decades, that's exactly what happened. So, I'm sure there are things like this that, there's more that could happen. In the meantime, I think the business end of this is going to distort things a good deal, which businesses, they gotta make sales, they gotta raise money. And so there's a lot of things that are going to be said that are probably not accurate, and gonna have to pay attention to kind of get the full story. So
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a long road ahead, but like when Dr. Erica Handley was on and talking about CRISPR and talked about all the different ways that it can be used in climate science and crop engineering and stuff like that, it seems like, but with all the ability we have to do genetic modification both for plants and animals nowadays, it seems like in the next decade or two, we're going to see a lot of change. So,
and I think it's also the ethical side of this. We should always be asking these questions. Honestly, we need to just call up Jeff Goldblum and be like, okay, what should we do here? And he'll be like, we're messing with things we don't understand. Life is going to find a way. And and then within months, the streets will be rampaging with giant dire wolves, with who can smarter than humans, and taking over, and it's
I think he'd probably more likely these days ask us to rent a home or something like that.
That's right. Hey, those are great commercials.
Must go faster. Okay. Humans, cloning humans, Tim. So obviously, as we are wont in these podcasts, if you want to have the moral discussion of this, talk to us offline. But for the genetic point of like whether or not human cloning is doable and or will be doable in the near future, do you have any insight on that?
Okay, so first off, we'll note that there has been genetic modification already. The example of that scientist in China, I believe, who made, and again, it was in the terms of what we're talking about, a relatively small genetic change, I think, to make babies that he modified more like resistant to disease, or something. So, but and of course it caused a big uproar, because that is touchy territory, right? Gene edited babies. That's the stuff of science fiction, but it's also huge, and there's a slippery slope there. I think, first of all, whether you should, but second of all, let's say your first answer is yes, go for it. Then it becomes, where do we draw a line? Okay, disease tolerance or resistance. Okay, how about coding for physical traits? Idealized height and weight, intelligence, and those kinds of things, which are well beyond our ability to do right now. But
Right.
the idea of they call it the designer baby, concept is kind of horrifying in a way. You get, go back to Mary Shelley and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and this kind of idea of uh, playing God and also tampering with the sanctity of human life, which I think most people and most creeds around the world uh, adhere to in some form. Um, and
That's the moral question, Tim. That's the moral question, which
that's the
is
moral part. That's
absolutely important. But
right.
what about success? Like, so you said we can gene edit babies to be more resistant to disease. But from what I've read, and I guess so, so I've got it up right here. It says in primates, there are two essential proteins for cell division called spindle proteins. They're very close to the chromosomes in the egg cell, and removing the egg's nucleus to insert the donor nucleus also removes these spindle proteins, which can interfere with cell division. And if you interfere with cell division, then obviously you're not going to create an embryo and obviously no clone. So there are actual roadblocks in the cloning, the genetic editing process in order to actually create a clone. Because I'm thinking of movies like The Island. Remember that one, Tim? Did you see The Island?
Oh yeah, I lived the island. I actually
You
escaped.
are a clone.
Yeah, I'm number 7.
Yes, for those that haven't seen The Island, because I think it's an older movie. I don't know, whatever. It's got is it Ewan McGregor and Scarlett Johansson?
That sounds right. Yeah.
I feel like it's at least 10 or 15 years old. I don't know. Um, and it's about like cloning humans and then essentially using them as like body part farms.
It kind of a backup. You lose it. Your kidney goes bad.
Right.
It can get one off of your
Grab
clone.
your clones. Yeah. Right. So that type of thing seems quite a bit away from happening, kind of, in the way that like we can't creating the Ewan McGregor character, like creating the clone seems quite difficult, but actually creating lab grown body parts seems like we're actually getting closer and closer to that. Do you know anything about that?
No, but it does sound cool. I know that they've talked about that as if you could, part of the problem with like organ donors and that kind of thing is your body's immune response when a foreign object gets put in can be pretty tricky to handle. And if it's your own DNA, then in theory it wouldn't trigger that
Right.
response and make it a lot more likely to have a successful organ transplant or whatever.
Right. And that's so I've heard that I've read articles before and I just looked it up again. And with the AI that we have these days, it almost feels like information's too cheap. We don't appreciate it enough because it's everywhere.
That's right.
But the scientists are having success in growing essentially very miniature like organs in the lab. They can grow, based on using stem cells, create tiny little organs that haven't been able to create an actual full organ yet. But yeah, I mean, they're making progress on this, which is wild, right? So yeah, all of this, those types of things skirt the moral question, I think, enough that like people don't question too deeply the ethics of like, okay, can I grow a lung? So like, for example, my grandmother 30, more than 30 years ago passed away because she needed a new liver. She got a liver transplant, her body rejected it, and she died. But if it had been, like you said, her own DNA that had regrown her liver, a healthy liver, put it in her, maybe she's still around today. Well, I mean, I guess she's pretty old now, but and it doesn't get into these questions of, okay, what about the human soul or value of life or all those types of things. It's like, okay, I actually grew this in the lab, it's just part of me. So it doesn't seem like it necessarily meets with the same resistance per se. There are other potential issues, I think, but yeah, this is yeah, there's a whole field of like different ways to get into this genetic editing and being able to create uh, body parts and organisms that are using the same DNA and or related DNA to us. So, insight on that, Tim? Thoughts?
The Yeah, I don't know any more about it than you, but I I think that it's exciting to watch, and for the reasons that you're talking about, I think especially medically, if that can give doctors and patients more options or better options, we can improve people's quality of life, and that's super cool. So yeah, it's exciting to watch. Um, and I think the good news, as far as if you worry about this kind of thing, is that the things that get debated, most of them are still, long ways away from being even possible with the technology we currently have. But
Right.
yeah,
And that's
oh, sorry, go for it.
well, I was just going to say, like, I feel like once again, if you're listening to this, and I'm guessing we have people that listen to us that have very different moral ideas than we do, and that's fine. The pragmatic issues that would block you from doing cloning per se right now are still significant enough that it just, like I said, even the dire wolf, like Tim said, is like it's a gray wolf with some different characters spliced in, um, and so when I've read, it's like human cloning is quite a ways off, even in the sense that where like if you don't have any moral qualms with it, there's just too many risks, too many genetic malformations that would come because we don't know what we're doing, and therefore like whether you even get a viable clone, there's a very reasonable chance that the embryo would just die within days, hours,
Yeah,
minutes, and that these things, like, we would introduce changes inside this organism such that it would never get to a full grown human. um, so we're not at the point where the soul of man is at question per se, but I think there are ethical questions besides that, is just saying what's most useful and most likely to help people enjoy happy, healthy lives right now.
yeah, and and yeah, the exciting or controversial changes that could be made are generally so complex that, anyways, what gene codes for intelligence or physical fitness, it's there's no one. It's a huge interplay, right? So
Right,
so
right.
figuring that all out would be, anyways, well beyond our ability now. Um, I think for me, big takeaways, one is to appreciate the achievements, the things that these companies have done, um, that are, scientifically remarkable. Two, appreciating the economics at play, recognizing that a business is still a business, and McDonald's is going to do everything it can to make its hamburgers look incredibly good and maybe unrealistically good compared to what you're going to get at the drive-through. And these bioscience companies and whatever are going to say and represent their work in the most glamorous and
Are you
uh,
comparing the dire wolf to a Big Mac?
have you ever had dire wolf burger? So
just 10 years down the road, we'll
that's
have
right. Yeah, maybe Colossal Sciences falls on hard times, has to turn to a different business model. All right, we're opening a fast food chain, Wolf
oh
Burger.
my. Wow. Wow, that got dark. Um,
Yeah,
there's
that's
like
right.
cute little pictures of these direwolf puppies, and you're talking about Big Macs, Tim.
Yeah,
It's
our burgers
disturbing.
are made from 100% genetically modified meat. I
Oh
think I
my.
think there's a niche there, and yeah.
Is there, Tim? I don't know about that. Arguably, we already have, Taco Bell. gets a pretty bad rap for most of its beef
Taco
not being
Bell.
beef.
Maybe a partner. I see a partnership between Colossal Sciences and Taco Bell. Yeah, that with our tacos, 2% dire wolf meat, and the rest is you know undisclosed.
I
Hey,
do think, like you said, though, the business aspects of it, Tim, I'm telling you, within our lifetimes, possibly, there's going to be like a dire wolf petting zoo, um,
that would
with
be awesome, and I
new
would love to look at.
appendages, new
I'd love to look at the
appendages
waiver that you have to sign to get in there.
well, that's the point is, Tim, as you walk out with one arm, like you're just going to be able to like pay a little more for your cloned arm that's going to be sitting there waiting for you as you walk out.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. What if they sold one-armed T-shirts that said "My arm got eaten by a dire wolf"? That'd be kind of cool.
Okay, well, so not so much with the dire wolf thing, but I do think a zoo that has like extinct animals on display is something that we could actually see in our lifetimes. That like where, like you said, and maybe these aren't like the pure geneticists and the pure biological doctorate out there is going to say these aren't actually whatever, but like the public that are going to go there and be like, yeah, that wolf is like 5 feet taller than a gray wolf. That's not a normal gray wolf. That's a dire wolf. I feel happy that I spent my $150 to come in here and see that woolly mammoth and that dire wolf and that dodo bird, and I think that could be something that money talks, Tim. So I think that could happen.
I would be super excited to see something like that, even if it were a case where it's like, well, it's not technically a fully, if it looked the part and acted the part,
Right.
and then and now one last caution I think in this discussion is the the risk of misguided casualness about conservation. One thing I saw is that a member of Congress, cited the dire wolf, quote, de-extinction as kind of an excuse to be lackadaisical about conservation efforts. Kind of the idea that we can resurrect a
We can bring them
species
back
if we need to. Yeah. So what's the big deal?
That's dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think recognizing that that's not the case, that's poor logic and dangerous reasoning. And if nothing else, recognizing that we need to maintain our efforts to be good stewards of our planet and leave a planet as rich and diverse to our children as we inherited. Anyways.
Right. I would leave us with some questions that I don't think you have an answer for, but in as much as these dire wolves are genetic modifications of gray wolves, are the genetic modifications like if we tried to recreate a population of dodo birds based on whatever, like you said, there's no super close relative, but do the genetic modifications stick in the same way that like a developed species all the DNA changes along with it, I guess. Like what is the next line in the population look like? Is it a hybrid that's not the same? I don't know. You see what I'm saying?
Maybe like does I see. So when we see the puppies of this first generation, are they identical, or do they? That's a good question. I don't know. And beyond that, let's say Colossal Biosciences takes that next generation and takes their DNA and makes further modifications. They say, okay, we were able to change this. Now we're going to try changing this. From what I understand, there were some changes that they didn't make because the gene there, it was too tricky. There might have been negative effects or whatever. So yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's almost like we need a someone that isn't a layman to talk about this with.
Yeah, a true expert.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can get someone like Erica back on the podcast. If you want to listen to her, and she actually has worked with CRISPR technology, go back to our basics of basics of bioscience or basics of biotech. I think it was last year, maybe it was 2 years ago now. I think it was last year though. Anyway, but good job, Tim. Thanks for the podcast. Any final words of wisdom?
Oh, shoot.
Let it be.
Let it be. Speaking, that's right. Yeah. When the broken-hearted people living in the world agree, dire wolves are awesome. Let it be. Yeah. No. Go fight, win.
Go fight, win. Okay, that's good. Yeah. Yes, I'd find that very apropos of dire wolves.
I wonder if go fight, win has ever been followed by apropos before. Go fight, win. Apropos.
Okay, well, it should, and now it has. So
now it has.
All right, we'll be back again. I teased months ago that I was going to get a CFO on here to talk about like CFO stuff. So I've got to get my brother-in-law on. Hopefully I can arrange that next month.
I had a CFO sighting just the other day. I was just walking outside and I looked up and I'm like, what is that?
Was it a certified flying object?
That's right. You could see its certification right there at just kind of hovering eerily, kind of making this weird noise.
Yeah.
Wait, CFO, what's that? Certified
Chief
financial
officer.
My idea is more interesting.
Well, I guess it depends on. No, it doesn't. Okay. Well,
Claire's joined us, so
I heard that as well. Okay. All right. Well,
end it quick. End the podcast.
Yep. All right. See you guys later.
All right. See you.